Hi, I'm Joanna Figueroa from Fig Tree Quilts, and I'm here in the Fat Quarter Shop studio today to show you one of my new patterns called Scissor Satchels, and I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to construct them. So the first thing you're going to want to do if working on any of the three sizes of this pattern is you're going to want to gather your supplies. And today, for the tips and things I'm going to show you, we're going to be working on the middle size, which is the spool satchel, the one that you see here. There's also the scissor satchel, which is the bigger one. And then there's the little button satchel, which is, actually I have different names for them in the pattern that I can't remember right now without looking, but it's the one with the button, and then there's the one with the scissor, and then this one with the spools is the one I'm gonna show you today. So you're gonna want a cream zipper. I have you getting 14 inches for all three of them. You don't need 14 inches for all three of them, but it's just easier for me. That's the one that I have lots of them. So, but it will be, that will be enough for any of the sizes in this pattern. So, and I love the ones from Atkinson Designs, but you can use any zipper that you like in terms of, you could also do a different color. I just use the cream neutral zippers most of the time. Once in a while I do match them in color, but for this project I use those. And then this fun twill tape that I've put on the top of these just as a little decorative accent. It gives it a little bit of like a vintage feel, and I love the way it feels. Comes in an entire roll. It's really fun to do and to put onto all kinds of different things. You're going to need some basic piecing thread. I use the Aurifil 2000. Or if you want to do something a little bit more decorative on some part of it, like perhaps on the loop or even in your stitching, you'll be stitching some of this, doing a little bit of your own quilting. It would be a fun opportunity to use your matching threads. So this we did with hazel and plum, and so I've got the hazel and plum threads. If you were working on all three of the bags, you would only need one charm pack for all of the little piecing parts, and then you would need background for the purse, for the bag, and inside lining, and then whatever you're going to use for the background of your blocks. And those are design choices, so you can pick what you want. I use the black Moda cross weave, which I'll talk about using in a second, or tips for using. I love it. I love how it helps all of the other colors to pop. And then I use just one of my regular creams from my collection in the back, or you can also use the Bella Solid Ivory for that. I used a little leftover, you know how the Moda bundles come with the tape around it? I love to put that into little things like this, and so there's a little tag in here from that. And then some of my favorite little zipper pulls. So that's what you need to get started on the project. And let me show you the first step. So to start on this version of the bag in the pattern, you're going to first need to basically construct the front of your bag. And to do that, you're going to be making 8 of these little spool blocks. So here's a couple of tips to start. So for the cross weave, which I love working with, it's a woven fabric, and so it does have a little bit of give. It has a personality of its own. It's not a printed fabric. So what I do recommend is, even if you don't normally starch your fabrics, that you do starch this. Now, I don't starch it like crazy. I don't wet it completely, but I do starch the whole front of it with my faultless or any kind of starch that you use at home, and I do press it well. It gives it so much more stability. It makes it 100 times easier to work with. So I would highly recommend that you do that. Once that would be the only prep that you would really need to do. Like I mentioned before, to make all the fronts of all these baggies, you only need one charm pack. And so out of my charm pack, I've chosen a few different color combinations for these little spools. And the way you make these, and the sizes and the instructions for all of this are in the pattern. You're going to make 2 little sides to the spool, and I use what I call the sew and flip method for all of these blocks, meaning that you have a bigger background piece, and then you sew a square on, you mark it or press it on the diagonal, and you flip it out. So I do that for a lot of my blocks. I find that you get really wonderful results, whether you're a beginner or whether you're an experienced quilter. It really helps with accuracy. And so since I'm a teacher and I travel to teach, and I'm always trying to find good ways for people to be successful, that's one of the things that I adopted early on, and I love it. I know there's a little bit of fabric waste with that method, but I think that it's well worth the results. So on this little piece, you've got the background piece that you're using for the back of the spool. And as you can see, I have the little square of cream on there. And since this is so small, I wouldn't have even necessarily drawn a line. I would have pressed a line, or to be completely honest, with something this little, I would have eyeballed the line. Because by the time you have your foot down here, you've literally only got about 3/4 of an inch to go before you have to end, and it's fairly easy to see where that line needs to go. So that's what I would do. But for comfortability, if you want to mark it or press it for yourself, that would be your diagonal line. You would sew it, press it open, do the same thing on the other side, and you do 2 of those. You would then do the little centerpiece where you have the center, which is the cross weave, and then the 2 sides of the background. And I would press those towards, since these got pressed out, I would press this into the cross weave. And then you're basically just going to do this, and you're going to put that together. And that looks a little bit funny like that, but it will end up looking like this, right? Because that will come in and it will look a lot more proportionate. And then you're going to do 8 of those with 8 different color groupings. And I just kind of chose a different, a set of colors. This is Coney Island here in the fabric in the samples, and the one in the actual finished bag is Hazel and Plum. So those are different collections depending on which look you like. The other thing that you're going to want to do is from some of your charm packs, either the same ones that you're working with or charm squares, the leftovers, or different colors. If you want to go more scrappy, you're just going to make a little strip. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the squares. And again, all the sizes are in the pattern. So this is all that you are going to need to do for piecing for the front of the bag. And the rest of it is really all bag assembly. So you're going to have this. You're going to add that part to the bottom of it. You're going to add the side pieces of the cross weave and then press those out towards the cross weave. You're going to add the top and the bottom. That would be the top and the bottom. And that is going to be basically the front of your bag. And later on, after you've quilted it, you're going to trim it and you're going to make it exactly the size you need, so you don't need to worry about that. But that is basically the very front of the bag. And the next part is we're going to start working on the assembly. So for the next part, we're going to start working on putting it together. So the very first thing you need to do is you've already constructed the front, right? And you're going to put it onto the, actually we already did that. So pretend for the purposes of this demo that this piece is pieced in here, right? So this is here, it's got that little row right here underneath it, and then it's cross weave around it. I just didn't have the time to do a whole nother part to show you, but just pretend that that's there instead of just solid, okay? So you just kind of have to go kind of work with me on that one. So what you're going to do then is you're going to take that whole pieced front and you're going to fuse it to a piece of, I love to use the fusible fleece from Pellon. It's a nice in-between weight. It's not as floppy as using a piece of a scrap of batting would be. It's not quite as stiff as some of the other bag making supplies are, so it's my personal choice. But if you like to work with something else, more power to you. You can absolutely use a different stabilizer back here, but I like to use that fusible fleece. And it basically, the part that is the fusible part, you can feel it. It's got little dots and you can kind of feel them with your finger, and then this part is smooth. So you're going to put that part on the back of your pieced front. And again, remember, we're pretending that this is pieced. And you're going to basically fuse those 2 pieces together. And your next step on that is you're going to quilt it. So if you've never done any quilting before, and that's part of the bag making process that intimidates you, really, I wouldn't worry about it at all. One of the easiest things to do on something this small, and it's a great way to practice a little bit of quilting that you could actually use for a quilt as well, would be straight stitching. And so I have a piece here that I've shown you. I've started, you just literally start with a straight line and you follow. You can either mark it all the way across if you really want to. You can use the edge of your foot kind of as your guide. On the bag itself, I used probably 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, and so I literally just used the side of my foot. And I just kept going, working over and over by the side of my foot. Here, I just did bigger pieces, and as you can see, they're not even that even. And on a bag, it doesn't matter. It adds to the feel of it, and you can't even see it. It's just basically putting it all together, and you want to see a light, faint stitching, which is why I still use the cream, and when I use color, I use a lighter color. Like this would have looked really cute with like an apple green thread or an aqua thread, but I don't necessarily try and match it at all to the background because I actually want that stitching to show, because I think it adds to the charm of the bag. So as you can see here, I've basically stitched the quilting on, and I don't know if you can see that on camera, but I don't even go all the way to the end because it's just easier, and that part's going to get trimmed off, and if it doesn't get trimmed off, it will be in the seam allowance, and so it won't matter. I literally just come across and go back down, come across, go back down, and I just keep going. And I ended this piece here so that you could see, basically, it's just flat, and as you go along, you're kind of just basically doing that back and forth, and I would finish that there until the whole thing was quilted. And then the pattern will tell you to trim it to a certain size so that it matches what you're working with, because it's probably a tiny bit bigger. But basically that way you can trim stuff off and not worry about the edges. You do the exact same thing here to the front, and then you do the same thing to the back. And on this bag, what we did to do the back to add a little extra decorative detail is we put another one in, a little strip of that patchwork in there. If you don't want to do that, you can absolutely just do all one piece that would look like this, and that would be the back. If you want to get more creative and piece in a whole little block in here, you can absolutely do that. There's a lot of room for creativity on these kinds of small bags because it's not a huge thing. So you don't have to make 30 30 blocks or something, right? It's just it's a fun project to do in between quilting. So you don't have to commit a lot. You could put in a fun block in there. So that's the back and that's the front. You do need to quilt both the front and the back. Once you've done that, we're basically ready for the next step. For the next step, we've finished off the quilting and we've trimmed this up. And the next part, and again, remember we're pretending that this piece part is here in the center. And you're going to basically just put on this piece of this twill ribbon. Now, you could use if you had vintage ribbon, you could put that on there. You could use any other kind of ribbon or vintage trim that you have. I love this one. And it doesn't matter really where you start, what number. I mean, you could try and, trim it so that you start at a 1, but I don't really think it matters what number it starts on. But I love the feel that it adds to all of these little projects. So the best way to put it on that I've found is to stitch it on one side super close to the outside. And again, I'm just using the regular cream thread all the way down to the end, and then just come around and do the same thing. And I've only done it here on one side to show you how I did that, and then to come around and to go really close. And I would go slow so that you could really go close to the outside, because if you come a little bit in, later on that will start curving up when you use it. And so you don't want that. You want it to really be down there nicely, and so you really just want to go as close to the edge as you can, so slowly, so that you don't fall off the edge. And so basically, that's the only other part, the thing that you need to do to the front of it. The next piece that you need is you need to cut your lining. And so actually in the pattern you would have done all of that cutting at the very beginning. But you're going to cut a piece of the lining. And again, this is from Coney Island, but this one is made from, let's see what this one looks like on the inside. It's a little scary to open that on camera because I don't remember what we put in here. So this is from also a yellow, but it's a hazel and plum yellow in there. I'm gonna close that because I think there's stuffing in there. So you're gonna do the lining piece, and then you need 4 little tab pieces. You could use the same color, or if you wanna add another little bit of something, I'm trying to think here. I used a different color, for example, on this than I did on the inside, just to have a little bit of different color in one more spot, and that's totally up to you in terms of a design choice. And what you're gonna do with those is that is going to be what you're going to use to prepare the zipper so that it's ready to put into the bag. And so as you can see here, I've got my zipper and I've already sewn it on one side. So how I did that is I took 2 of those little tabs, one on the bottom and one on the top, right sides together on the end of my zipper, and I've pinned them in on both sides so that it doesn't shift. And sometimes I even put a pin straight across so that, because it's open, because I can't have the head all the way in there because it will be in my way, so the zipper's open. So I would even put a pin sometimes that way to keep it as closed as possible so that it doesn't open during that time that I'm stitching it. And then I'm gonna actually turn this around so that it's not so awkward. And then I'm literally just going to stitch 1/4 of an inch here. And because my zipper is 14 inches and it's longer than anything I need, I'm not real worried about exactly where I'm putting it for the first set. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do there. And I'm going to take out that pin so you guys can see. When you're done with it, you're basically then going to open those both up and just finger press them out. So you're basically creating a nice little fabric piece at the end of your zipper that makes it easier and prettier for it to go into your bag. Okay, what you're going to do next is you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, but at this point you're going to need to measure from here to here, and it will tell you in the pattern what that size is for each bag, because the longer the zipper is, the different that measurement is. So for this bag, it's from here to here, and I've just marked it with a friction pen on the zipper itself. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up one piece on this side and another piece on the other side. And I'm going to make sure that I can see where my little line is, that it's 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to sew right on that line. I'm going to pin it, I'm going to sew it, and I'm going to flip it out so that that part looks exactly like that part. And it's not sewn right now, obviously, on camera, so I'm just kind of making do. But that's what your piece will end up looking like that you're going to piece into the bag. And that's what we're going to do next. So we have a couple more little steps to do before we're ready to assemble. And I think that that might be, as people are afraid of bag construction, they look at the finished bag and they see all these little details and they think to themselves, or quilters a lot of times think to themselves, I can't do this. It's too complicated, it's too many pieces. And I find that if you look at the end before you start, you might get a little bit overwhelmed. But if you literally just take it little steps by little steps, each step in and of itself is usually very simple. And so if you do the 6 or 7 steps, by the time you're at the end, you'll have all the little pieces that you need, and maybe that will help you not be so overwhelmed. I don't think that there's anything that is that complicated about some of these simple. Of course, there are super complicated bags to make out there. So certainly I wouldn't start there if I were you, if bag making intimidates you. But one of these bags, they're fairly basic, and the little components that you need to make to finish them are not hard, and they're probably things that you've done before or very similar to things that you've done before. So with the things that we've already done, we've prepped the zipper, we've made the front, we've quilted it, we've made the bag, we've quilted it. You just need a few more things. And so you've got, for the pocket, again, it's optional. If you don't want a pocket or you don't want to do an extra step, skip the pocket. But if you want a pocket, you're basically going to cut 2 pieces. I used the same fabric as I did for the lining. Again, if you want to do something decorative, use a different fabric for that. And then I used a piece of stabilizer, a fusible one again, because I like my pocket to be a little bit stiff and not so completely floppy. Again, you can use any stabilizer that you have or that you are familiar with or that you're comfortable with. So I basically took a piece and put that on the back. And then there's 2 pieces that are together of the lining. I sewed it all the way around, and I left an opening of about, so let's see, 3 inches, okay, on this size of pocket. Now, a little tip that the gal who sews with me regularly showed me, she's a seamstress, and she learned this, I think, from her quilt teacher about 25 years ago. When you're doing something like that, that you know you're going to have to flip, that you have an opening of, when you start, stitch all the way down to the end. So don't just stop at the seam, actually go to the ends, and so you stitch in and then do the whole thing, and then when you finish, you stitch back out to the outside. And so you create 2 little lines right there, and it will make it much easier to fold in when you get to that step, which is the step now. So the only thing I would do to this before I flip it is I would trim the 4 corners. Like that. And I'm then going to turn my bag inside out. Sorry, not my bag, my pocket. Inside out. And I'm going to push the corners out with my fingers first. Oh, that has a little piece of tape on there identifying for me what that is. I'm going to work with my fingers to get the corners. One side is got that interfacing on it, so it's a little bit stiffer than the other side. And I'm basically just going to work it with my fingers. And if I find that it's not really pushing out as far as I'd like, I'd use any sharper tip. Now, scissors are probably too sharp, but there's lots of things that you can use. The back end of something, you know, maybe a mechanical pencil. There are tools for this also that you can have that are specifically for this, but I don't really have one here with me right now. So I would work to basically get that pushed out all the way. And given that you've gone down on both ends of this, this becomes very simple to fold under so that it basically makes a straight line with the rest of your baggie, the rest of your pocket. I keep calling this a baggie. Okay, so you're going to press, as you can see, that needs a good press. And once you're done with it, you are just going to fold that little opening under, and you're not even going to worry about stitching it down right now. On this next step, what you're going to do is you're going to take your lining piece and you're going to position it in the way that it says to in the directions. It'll tell you, you know, how many inches and where you want to place it. And you're going to find where that opening is. Where's my opening? There it is. And you're going to put that opening on the bottom of the part that you're working on. And you're going to do, if you used interfacing, you're going to put the interfacing on the outside part because that's the part that's a little bit stiffer. And you're basically going to stitch, again, closer than 1/4 of an inch, closer, more like 1/8 of an inch. You're going to stitch down one side and you're going to stitch along the bottom. And as you stitch along the bottom, you're basically closing that opening. So you don't need to stitch that closed on its own because as you stitch here, you're going to close it. That was the opening. You're going to stitch all the way here and all the way up. And don't get carried away and stitch the top closed. And the reason I say that is because I've done that before. Okay, so 3 sides only, leave the top open because otherwise you won't have a pocket. And then that is, your lining at that point is ready for bag assembly. And so I'm going to scoot that over. We have one final step. You're going to make your little strap. And so I've cut a piece of fabric, length. You're going to then basically fold it. This is shorter because you don't need it to be that long, but you're going to fold it to the center, and you're going to fold each side to the center as well. So let me open that up. So it looks like this by the time you're done folding. So you fold it down the middle first, then you open it, and you fold each side, that side to the middle, and that side to the middle. So that you have a piece that looks like that all the way down, and then you fold that to itself so that all the folded edges are on one side. Okay? And you can use that basically method for any strap that you're making for any size bag. So, you know, it could be really wide and it could be the strap to a tote bag. It could be really skinny like this, which is just like the little side strap to these little baggies. And so you're basically going to have that. And you're then going to top stitch on one end. So you'll do the side that is actually where you're closing it. So like this, you're going to close those folded edges with 1/8 of an inch top stitch all the way down. And then you're going to come and you're going to stitch on the other side on the fold. And that's just so that it's decorative. You obviously don't need to stitch on the folded side because it's already closed, but it looks much nicer to have a stitch on both sides. And it makes a nice little flat strap. And then you're going to trim it down to the size. Depending on which of the 3 bags you're making, the sizes of them are different because you need them to be a little bit smaller or a little bit longer. Okay? So that's the final little piece that you need to make before you're ready to construct your bag. I used the little pieces of these leftover Moda tape, and so I would also cut a piece of that I'm going to use for my little tab inside, and then we're ready to go to assemble the bag. So we're going to assemble. Ready? All right. We're going to take our little strap, and we're going to pin it in, and again, remember we're pretending that this is pieced. We're going to pin it in right here on the right hand side. And we're going to take our little piece of tape. We're going to pin that in also on this side. And I want about that much sticking out. So I'm going to pin that in right there. Okay? And then I'm going to put my lining piece down first, top right side up. I'm going to position my zipper with my little ends right side up with the head on this side. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to flip it upside down. I'm going to line that up. Let me scoot this down a little bit closer to me. And I'm going to pin this all together. Now, this is probably the part where you want to work on being accurate the most. So you can put the head over here for now since we're going to sew from the other side. At some point you're going to need to move that over since we're not using a zipper foot. If you have a zipper foot and you feel comfortable doing that, then absolutely it's easier. But I do these without a zipper foot so that I can prove to myself and to everybody else who wants to do it without a zipper foot that you can. And so I'm basically going to look at what I'm doing here. I'm going to make sure that the zipper end is lined up with the top and that this is, so just little piece by little piece, I'm going to check it and pin it. Then I'm going to check it and pin it. And I'm going to continue on down. That's a great looking pin, don't you think? Let's not use that one. How about a straight one? Check it, and you just, again, you want to go slow because you want that to be completely lined up because it wants to shift because there's lots of little layers, and that will really give you a, oh, like I didn't, that one shifted down. So I'm going to unpin it. I'm going to pull that back up because this is where you're going to really, if it shifts around on you, you're going to mess up your zipper and it's going to look bumpy and uneven. And then you're going to be frustrated because you're not going to like the way your bag looks. I've got 2 different sizes of pins in here. Okay, a little bit more. And a couple more. Lined up. Okay, so once I'm all the way to the end, the head is down here somewhere. So at some point it becomes fairly difficult to get a good pin. So what you're going to do is you're basically then going to sew that, again, slowly. You're working on a zipper without a zipper foot. So and you want to be using your 1/4 inch foot because that will have the best chance of not going like this all around your zipper. But with a 1/4 inch foot, if you go in a 1/4 of an inch here, you should be able to, depending on, you know, kind of what kind of a zipper you're using and how it's working. Sometimes you'll have to ride on the side of your foot on the zipper. If you're going slow enough, you can do that. And sometimes you can get it to butt up right next to it. Okay? So you're basically going to sew all the way down from one end to the other. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and go do that. And then I'll be back here in just a second. Okay, so I basically sewn the top, and how I did that is I sewed from the beginning to about here, and then I removed these pins and I moved the zipper head out of the way so that I can finish it, and then I repinned that last section and I finished it off. So that's one of the things that you need to do when you're not working with a zipper foot. So then I took all of the pins out. When you open it, you've got the beginnings, you've got one side done basically. So it's going to look like this, and you're going to finger press that out of the way. You don't really want to be doing a lot of ironing on here because a lot of these zippers will melt unless you're using a metal zipper, and those are usually quite a lot bigger. And so you want to just finger press that away from your zipper. And I like to top stitch right here at least once to give it a nice flat feel, and sometimes even twice to give it like a nice little decorative edge. So I would do that. I'm going to go ahead and do that next. And I'm also going to do set up for the second part. And so you're basically going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And so how I'm going to set that up is I'm going to take that, and on this side I'm going to have my bag. This is now my bag back. Say that fast a couple times, bag back. And my other lining piece on the other side. And I'm going to line it up and pin it together exactly like I did with the other one. Okay, so I'm going to go, am I doing that right? Let's see. Sometimes when I do these things, I literally have to kind of make myself stop and think it through. So when that opens, okay, that's going to be right. And when this opens, okay, it's right. But sometimes I literally have to stop and think it through for a second, so don't feel bad if you have to do that too. I'm going to line that zipper up with the lining, and I'm going to line this up here, and I'm going to pin all the way across, and I'm going to sew so that the other side is done. But first, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that decorative stitch, and I'll be back in a second. So we have sewn the second part on, as you can see here. This is the front part, the lining. We've sewn it from the beginning to end, and just like before, in the middle we stopped, we moved the zipper head out of the way, and we continued on. So when we open it now, I'm going to open this side and open the lining so that we've got the front of our bag is basically on one side, and it still has these items pinned to it, and this is on this side, okay? And you can close your zipper, and you're going to then top stitch on this side just exactly the same way that you did on the front. The next step is you're going to go ahead and move this into the center because you're going to need it. To flip the bag out in a second. But you're going to take the bag in the front, and you're going to sew it together on that side. And you're going to take the two lining sides, and you're going to sew those together on the bottom. And so what you have at that point is you've got a loop. You'll have a loop of the lining and a loop of the outer part of the bag. And one will be on one side, will be on the other side. Okay? The next step after that you do is you're going to take that and you're going to flip the whole thing inside out. I think I'm going to show you that part because it is a little bit hard to describe in words. So I'm going to sew those things together, and then I'm going to show you how to turn the whole thing inside out. Okay? So we're nearing the end. All right, you're almost there. So I've sewn this right here, straight down, and the front and back straight down. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to open it up, and as the pattern says, what I say is you're going to turn the lining right side out so that it is like a tube around the front side. So you're going to look inside there, and you're going to see that your zipper is open because you've opened it, because if it's closed, it's hard to get open at this point. You're going to loop, you're basically going to pull it through so that one is around the other one. And it's a little bit awkward in the beginning, but you're basically just pulling this up and over with the inside loop inside and the lining on the outside. And you're just going to keep messing with it until it's nicely flattened. And you've got the inside loop that you've sewn together inside the lining loop. Does that make sense, I hope? So you've got the zipper on the top and you've gotten it opened. I'm going to actually put it in the middle, and you've got the outside, the lining on the entire outside of your bag, and you're seeing it on the side that you're seeing. And then the bag itself is basically looped inside there. The big loop is inside. One is inside the other. Okay? And at this point, you're basically almost ready to finish the bag. You're going to then sew the two sides on one side and on the other side. And first you're going to have to actually line those up and make sure that they're lined up together and that they're nice and flat and there aren't any tucks or anything inside. And you're going to sew from the top. You're going to sew here and you're going to sew here. And then you have two options. You can either just zigzag that edge on both sides, right? And zigzag it. Or you can bind it. So the bag that we've been showing you, we've bound the sides to make a more finished edge, just exactly the way that you would bind a quilt. You're going to bind up the side on each side if you want a completely finished bag inside. On this one, it all depends on, how many bags you make, and if it's like a once in a lifetime bag or bags that you're going to kind of just, use for maybe pencils or something like that, or notions that you feel like are going to get, and you're going to replace it in a little while. It all depends on how much finishing you want. You're going to do that. And your next step and kind of your final step in the bag construction is you're going to make your bag corners. And the way that looks on the bag is you open up your bag and you squish out that little corner right there. You make sure that your seam is down the middle, and you're going to trim off the amount that it says in the pattern, and the sizes are all different based on what bag you're making. And then you also have and you're going to sew it right on that. You're going to decide the same thing. Do you want to just have a raw edge bottom there, or are you going to want to bind it? It's bindable. You can do it. It's just a small space and it's a little bit bulky. So we just basically zigzagged the raw edges of that on that side. And the same thing on that side. It's the very bottom corner of the bag. You never look at it. So it all depends on, probably it depends on your personality and, you know, how much of a perfectionist you are. Sometimes I feel like I'd like to finish it. On a bigger bag, I finished it all the way to the end because I wanted it to look clean and neat. And sometimes I'm just ready to have the bag, and so I don't want to really bother with it. Again, personality. So you've had, at this point, you're going to turn your whole bag back right side out. You're going to poke out your edges, or your corners rather, with your fingers, or if you have a special tool to do that, you can, that helps to pull out this side. Same on this side, you can pull that out with your finger. And sometimes it takes a little bit of maneuvering to get that to be a nice little flat edge, and you can use, like I said, a tool, your fingers, the edge of something. Nicely flat. And you have your bag. And the process is the same for the bigger one, the one with the scissor on the front. The process is the same for the little spool one. It's really, this process is the same for any little pouch like this that you make. You've got your little handle, and we've put on these little zipper pulls. And if you just look inside, there's your bag ready for use. I hope you enjoyed watching that, and I hope that this gives you enough confidence to go home, well, you probably are home, to make your own. Thanks so much.